GDLS Canada, an industry leader dedicated to supporting our customers and the community.
Bill Lefeuvre. I was actually born in Toronto. I never knew that until I was almost a teenager because I lived, other than the first week, my whole life basically in St. Catharines in my early years.
And you never played the game of lacrosse, but you were brought to it. Tell us about how you were introduced to the game of lacrosse.
Well, the first lacrosse game I saw was at Garden City Arena, and I wasn't involved, just as a spectator, and there was some goaltender from St. Catharines named Buff McCready, and I was just absolutely amazed at what he could do, and I think he was second in team points on the team. So that was my very first exposure. I'd never heard of it again. Then I just lost sight of it, and I moved from the private sector to start working for the city at the same time as Jim Brady had moved down here. And after a few weeks, we became friends, and he asked me to get involved with the Junior A club on the executive level on board, which I did, and that sort of gave me the bug. And I think in the very first lacrosse season, I met Brian Allen, who was president of the Junior A's at that time, and he said, "Oh, why don't you got a couple of kids that were 6 or 7 years old. We need some players. Why don't you let them try it out?" Well, they were good athletes, but I said, "Yeah, okay." And they said, "Go. We got a game down in the States on Tuesday." So they never had a stick, but they loved it, and it became a real passion for me.
When did you actually join the city of St. Catharines and meet Jim Brady? When was that?
That was in the late. It was either in the very early '80s. I think we both started there in '82 or something. Okay. That's when I got involved. And when I went in, I was all in.
Tell us about some of your coaching at the different levels and how that progressed, and what kind of things you were able to accomplish coaching-wise.
I coached both for St. Catharines Minor Athletics at the time, or St. Catharines Golden Eagles, either as an assistant, and the Spartan Minor Association. So I coached in both as an assistant and a head coach. I coached bantam and midgets for 2 years each for Spartans, and we were always one of the better teams, along with St. Catharines Minor, during that period of time. I think our best year was we won the silver medal in provincial midgets, but, we were always in the top 6 or 8 clubs, even though we had 2 organizations. So that was kind of my minor experience. And then a lot of those kids wanted to stay together, and the junior Bs were playing out at Niagara Lake at that time, and were terrible. I don't think they'd won a game in 3 years, and I think the league wanted to kick them out. I got involved and helped turn them around. They had a winning season, I think, the first year, and then the second year, when most of my midgets graduated, we ended up in second place, and then we went to 4 straight Founders Cups.
So that was all with Niagara on the Lake?
Well, no, I got Rose to agree to move the team to St. Catharines. It was still a Niagara Lake franchise, but we played out of St. Catharines, played out of the old Hague Arena. And as I said, we went to 4 straight Founders Cups, medaled in 3 of them. I finally, in the year that we won in 1996 out in Edmonton, I was also the head coach because I got tired of us losing in the final round. I just thought that we needed a little more anticipation and being able to read what was happening in the game better, and I didn't want to lose again. And so it lucked out that we won it then, and that's a memory that I'll take to my grave. It was a highlight.
Now, along the way, you learned a bit from Jim Bishop, right? Along the way,
yeah.
Where and when did that happen?
Well, just during that whole time period, I tried to soak up information from people like Jim Hinkson, Jim Bishop. Of course, Jim Brady, I was on the bench lots of times with the junior A's. I was really just opening the door, but I learned a lot about, watching the players and coaching techniques and that kind of thing. So I was president of the junior A's for a bit. Their first recent appearance or reappearance in a Middle Cup was in '87, and that was sort of due to me. I convinced the Junior A Council, because it had been losing money on the Middle Cup, to let us host it and have a round robin. That was the same year. That was the last year of junior eligibility for the Gates brothers. So that was played. That Middle Cup was played in Garden City Arena, and we hosted it. And that helped the players and the kids at that time. I call them kids, with that level of experience. Because then, 90 and 91, we won the Middle Cup. So that was great. And my junior experience.
So that organization was called the St. Catherine's?
Well, it was the St. Catherine's Junior Athletics.
Junior Athletics, okay.
Yeah. I still remember at the meeting that we tried to get it, because they never really did round robins. It was always East versus West. But it was our turn to host, and we were able to convince the other teams, listen, we guaranteed them, we gave them $5,000, which was a lot of money, back in '87.
Who else played in that one?
Oh, the Kilgores, Grant Johnson.
I mean, team-wise, like what?
Oh, it was, it ended up being Peterborough, Victoria with the Gates brothers and St. Catherine's in the round robin.
Oh, okay.
Whitby thought that they would end up second. They told us that we weren't any better than a sixth place club. I still remember that. We ended up in second place that year. At that time we always had a couple of players or more from Six Nations, Cam Bomberry most notably. And then when they applied for their own team, that certainly hurt us, but I was proud to make the motion that they be allowed entry into the league, even though I think it hurt us winning another Minnow Cup.
And,
then I went on to major, because the kids that I had become friends with and enjoyed my time with, everybody had to leave town to go play senior A or major. So for 7 years I owned and operated the major club here, but I just couldn't financially. I didn't have deep enough pockets, but we always had a winning record, and we were in the playoffs for 7 straight years.
Did you coach as well with the majors, or just stay back as a manager?
I was really just the manager. I had to go on the bench once up in Brampton when the coaches got kicked out.
The creation of this facility we're in filming today, and it just recently celebrated its 25th anniversary, and you, among at least another 3 or so people like Mike Mitchell and Bob Hanna and Tom Suckamore, really were the driving force between this. And maybe you could explain how everybody kind of fit together. And there's a big story here that needs to be told.
Well, of course, all those people that you mentioned, they were all involved in lacrosse in their own respective ways. I was actually the director of business development for the city of St. Catharines, and already had decided that one economic direction we should take was we should attract special events and special opportunities. So I did much of that for the city. I was able to land the Blue Jays Farm Club here that played in St. Catharines for 10 years. I was able to get the Ontario Winter Games here in 1985. I put the bid together for the World Rowing Championships, which we didn't get at that time, but negotiated with the Toronto Maple Leafs for the farm club here. So I did a lot of that different kind of thing. So when I heard about the idea of having a Lacrosse Hall of Fame here, which wasn't my idea, it seemed to be the idea or or the champion was John Crouchman, I looked at it and said, gee, I think that should be here. St. Catharines is one of a few communities that has a real long history of lacrosse. So, you know, I talked to John, and of course, the number one thing that they were lacking was money. And it just was good circumstances. At the time, the province was giving out infrastructure money or money for special projects. And I got John to do a presentation to some counselors that would attend a meeting here, and we actually had it upstairs because the St. Catharines Museum was already built. And he made the pitch to them. They introduced it at the next city council meeting, got approval, and so a bulk of the funding, you know, came through that, and it was enough to ensure that, yeah, we had quite a bit of funding. You know, Mike Mitchell was able to get some federal funding. The Ontario Lacrosse Association came through and pitched the members to kick in annual dues for it. And then we just continued to build the team from there. But in the early going, during design and construction, you know, it was primarily Bob Hanna, Tom Suckamore, and myself. Actually, my two kids were teenagers, probably did as much behind the scenes as anything, because I was able to get all the cases that are in here donated from either the Seagram Museum or the Canadian Football Hall of Fame, which was renovating. So I would rent a truck, and those two would tag along, and we would do the heavy lifting. I couldn't do that now, but it was just it was so interesting because I learned a lot about history. I sort of did the storyline for the hall. Plus, over the years, I had collected quite a bit of memorabilia, right from Vancouver all the way to Halifax. Anytime I went anywhere, I would look to see if I could find anything to do with lacrosse. So I collected a lot of the old lacrosse cards. You know, we had on display black lacrosse balls, which were the first ones. I found those at an antique show in downtown Toronto.
Wow.
You know, the lacrosse cards I found in Halifax, Hamilton, Toronto, Vancouver.
Early 1900s.
Yeah.
Cards,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, and that's, you know, I started reading about the history, and I then realized that lacrosse was the #1 sport in Canada.
Yeah.
You know, as an example, Newsy Lalonde, who's both in the Hockey Hall of Fame and the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame, for hockey, as an NHL goaltender, he got paid $500 a year, which was still a nice income. But in lacrosse, he was paid $5,000.
Yes, yeah. By a Vancouver businessman who brought him out there, an Australian guy.
And things like, you know, the Canadian heavyweight boxing champion back in the 1900s, they brought him out to BC, and I think he quit off after a couple of games. He said, you know, this sport's too rough for me.
The other museum, the shipping museum, was already in place when you came with the idea?
The St. Catharines Museum was in place.
Not on this site?
On this site, yes.
So did they build more space onto it?
Yeah,
for this?
No, we built it.
But it's added on to the original
it's added
building?
on. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Their only stipulation was that they wanted it to be built to museum standards.
Yeah.
So I think we were, certainly in the world of lacrosse, we were the first Lacrosse Hall of Fame museum to be built to museum standards. So, you know, the basement area, which is the same size as here, is built with all the appropriate standards of air conditioning, humidifiers.
To keep the things that aren't shown.
Yeah. So it was good. And it helped too that I was the one actually that championed this location for the St. Catharines Museum. So I was involved in the building of that too. So I had a lot of knowledge and history.
Right.
And we already had good visitation here, so you know, we were hoping that it would be mutually beneficial, and I think it has been.
Now, you were always very mindful of First Nations and what they meant to this game and what the game meant to them. One physical example is the the huge cigar store Indian that has been transformed into a more respectful piece through Wes Patterson helping you?
It was donated. It was a cigar box store Indian. I knew that that would be offensive, but I was able to get a high school friend of mine who owned it, because he had a local antique shop, to donate it to us. We got the Niagara wood carvers to remove the cigar box and to remove the headdress and reconfigure it to look more like a Mohawk warrior. And we got Wes Patterson to create both the ball and the stick to the right proportions. And we passed the idea by Cap Bomberry and Mike Mitchell, and it's all made of one piece. We almost maybe broke it when we put it up, because it's as heavy as anything I've ever tried to physically move. We had to do it all by hand. We wheeled it in on carts and tied ropes to it, and then we had to sort of push it up and pull it up, and it started rocking when it started to settle, and almost went through the wall, which Tommy Suckmore and I fought about for months over. So I was thankful that didn't happen. That was pretty interesting.
Roughly how tall is that piece?
Probably 14, 15, 16 feet. I mean, they were not that common. How my friend had one, I have no idea. It's just that, it was an antique store, probably made over in the Philippines or someplace like that. We actually had to get a monument company that built graveyard monuments, who was owned by a friend of mine, to use his truck with a hoist to move it. It was there was
that big.
Yeah, 10 people couldn't carry it.
Well, you mentioned before you were able to save thousands of dollars for Lacrosse by getting donations of the cases that have so many of the trophies and other objects, memorabilia in them now, and that you got those from Hamilton, from the CFL, and then out in London, was it?
I think Kitchener.
Kitchener. For
Seagram's.
What museum was that?
I don't know what was in it before, but I assume it was a history of Seagram's. But in the case of Seagram's, they were closing down the museum, so they were surplus. In the case of Hall of Fame, they were renovating, so they had these extra cases, and of course they were in excellent shape.
Yeah.
Especially the Seagram's, and it was just keeping my ear to the ground for things that could help, and then acting on it. And the people were very gracious when they heard our idea and came forward. The same with a lot of the donations that we got. I mean, we have a photo of Charles Lindbergh taking a face-off out in Ottawa. We have, I think it's Frank Geary's diary from the early 1900s when the Canadian team went on a world tour to Canada, Australia. We have a letter signed by who was the famous coach of Notre Dame?
Newt Rockne.
Newt Rockne. Yeah, we have a letter from Newt Rockne on one of the old typewriters saying Notre Dame wasn't interested in having lacrosse.
Now they are.
So, yeah, they are now. But at the time they weren't. So, I mean, I don't think that stuff's been on display, but it's sitting down on the archives. I read about the Globe Shield and approached the Globe and Mail, hoping that was the predecessor.
That's a huge shield, almost like 5 feet high, probably. Yeah. Beautiful, with silver on it.
And St. Catherine's won it 7 times in a row.
Did they? And that was for what league was that for?
It would have been a senior men's league of some type.
Ontario league or something, maybe?
Yeah. I ended up doing a lot of research on lacrosse and its history, and it sure became evident to me, well, it was easy to know who can claim responsibility for, the creation of the game and the development of it. And it also became obvious that, the non-native community didn't treat the natives community fairly and didn't give them the recognition they deserved.
Yes.
So I did my small bit in always trying to keep that at the forefront of my mind. So along the way, when the Junior A Arrows and Six Nations applied to the Junior A League, And, I was happy to personally make that motion. A more significant was when we had our steering committee going in terms of the rules of eligibility and how you induct people in. Other people had developed the eligibility rules and the process and that. Then our group reviewed them, and the question of native eligibility came about, and I focused real quickly on that. I said, you know what? We're going to take our rules that we've adopted, we're going to give them to the native community and say you can use all or any or none of it. But the choice from the native community as to who goes in is 100% yours. And that doesn't sound like a big thing, but there was no museum that had done that in North America, including the Canadian Lacrosse Hall Museum, baseball, hockey. We said, you're empowered to decide on whatever criteria. I mean, the rationale for that was they didn't keep very good written records. The native community is oral history.
Oral history.
And it sure wasn't very likely that a bunch of white guys would know much about oral history of the native community. So, I think that worked out really, really very well, and was strongly supported by people like Cap Bomberry and Mike Mitchell.
The Ontario Lacrosse Association license plates. Tell us about how that even the idea began, and then how the things you saw along the way.
Well, I was working for the city at the time, and that was the same time where the Ministry of Transportation was relocating to St. Catharines. So I had to do a number of functions with the ministry, and as a result of that, I became pretty good friends with the deputy minister, because they held senior meetings down here and all that. And I don't know how the thought struck me, but I thought, I think a good way to promote lacrosse and maybe make a little bit of money would be to have a lacrosse license plate. Well, there were no license plates other than, the loon and government license plates. So I introduced the concept to the deputy minister. She did her due diligence, and she approved us, along with a couple of other organizations, as the first non-government license plate. And we would get a certain fee for every one that was sold. We had to guarantee to cover the cost of the first 100. So the first 100 were all in my name, and started off with 01 LX01, and then went up to 99. And they sold out very, very quickly. The design is a really interesting story. By happenstance, I had wanted something that was lacrosse and Canadiana. So I think when most people look at it, they see a Mountie beaver holding a lacrosse stick, which is what we wanted them to do. But if you look at it closely, the coat is slightly different than a Mountie jacket. The hat is actually a New York State Trooper hat. And the reason why we did that was because the Mountie logo is actually owned by an American company, Disney Corporation.
Wow.
So my hope was that when they saw it, they would sue us. And we would have this fight between this little group and organization who was Canadian and this big worldwide giant Disney. Sadly, it didn't materialize, because I think we would have had just tremendous publicity. So that's really how I had the concept. I can't draw, so I had a local graphic artist draw it.
Yeah.
But so it was thrilling, and I still have actually it's in Frank Lawrence's custody. I still have the first license plate. So it was a fun time. There were lots of fun little things like that.
Well, it's amazing to see how this all has progressed in 25 years, and it took some real effort and energy to get it started, and you were part of that, and the sport owes you a great deal of thanks for I know you paid the ultimate price for a bureaucrat. And what happened to you when you...
Well, there were a few counselors that weren't happy over some of the ideas that I pushed, and certainly and the city manager, they weren't happy that I was able to, behind the scenes, divert funds from roads and sewers and potholes, to building this place. And that at some point in time, I was a victim of downsizing, and that was when I guess my enemies were able to exact their pound of flesh. But I don't regret it for a moment, not a moment. I mean, my blood, sweat, tears, and money and time will always be tied up in this building and in this project and in the sport.
You were over in China for a while? Where
I was
you?
I would go over there for one semester a year when I was finished working in government. I took early retirement at age 50.
What year was this around, just so people have context, roughly?
About 15 years ago when I finished there, so probably around 2000, late 90s, early 2000. Okay. I spent 6 or 7 semesters over there. I was fortunate. The first time I went, I taught English, but after that I was able to land some contracts teaching business subjects because I had a pretty good background doing that, and got involved helping to launch the first lacrosse group in Shanghai. They were already playing it in Beijing and Hong Kong, so that was interesting. So I helped promote lacrosse over there. It was a minor role, but it was fun. And then when I came back, my brother lived out in Cape Breton, so I decided to live out there for a couple of years and help them relaunch lacrosse in Cape Breton, and it was pretty successful. And actually, I think I coached all of the teams along with other people, but I was on, every team, and we got the native communities involved out there. I was coaching a midget club, which had never played lacrosse before, and took them to the Eastern Midget Provincial Championships in New Brunswick, and we actually won a few games, so it was great. I think one of the proudest moments I've had in lacrosse was resurrecting the Founders Cup. Back in the early 90s, it was always a 3-team affair. 2 Ontario teams, 1 BC club. And it was always a foregone conclusion that the 2 Ontario clubs would end up in the finals. And our first Founders Cup was in Aurelia, and it was Aurelia, us, and somebody from BC. I put an application in to host it, and we went from 3 teams to about 9 or 10.
Wow.
And we had to bend the rules. We had to ignore the threats from the CLA. We created 2 divisions, so we had 2 cups.
Where were the teams from?
New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, 2 native teams, BC, Manitoba, and we helped pay for the cost on top of that. We helped subsidize the Manitoba team and the Nova Scotia team. And you paired off in a playoff game against a similar record. So the lesser teams played the lesser teams in the Consolation Cup or series. Nova Scotia did not win a game through the whole process. They were in the bronze medal consolation final. Yeah. They won. Huh. You would have thought that they won the Stanley Cup. And it was just such a heartwarming feeling to see that enjoyment. So despite the silly bureaucratic rules that lacrosse sometimes has, I mean, that was the whole joy of it. Anybody that could see that would always put the kids at the forefront in terms of, what the real purpose of it. The real purpose of playing lacrosse isn't to win a minnow or a Mann Cup. It's for people to enjoy the sport.
Yeah.
And that if you win that, that's great.
Yeah.
But being able to participate in a truly native to our history, Indigenous sport, is just a wonderful experience.
Yeah. So, Bill, we'll close now, but like a lot of great lacrosse people, they go somewhere, do non-lacrosse things, and then find a way to build the game while they're doing their day job.
Yeah.
And you're a perfect example of that. And the sport is extremely grateful, and just to have this place to celebrate a history unlike any other is a great thing to have here in Canada, along with the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame as well. And
And I've made some great friends throughout the years, both locally and across the country. So it's been a rich experience for me.